China is synonymous with skyscrapers, advanced technology, and a frenetic pace, typical of those racing towards the future. But behind this technological facade, there is another, less shiny side that rarely gets the spotlight: the situation of Chinese women. In this country where tradition and modernity keep bumping into each other, being a woman still means facing a series of barriers that seem straight out of another era. Constant family demands, extremely high social expectations, and even government policies that pressure women to marry early. Today, Bellomundo is going to take you to see this little-talked-about reality: what life is like for women in the world's most populous country, and why so many people call it a living hell. Shall we find out? Number 1. History and cultural roots. The trajectory of women in China is marked by a constant interplay between tradition and transformation. For centuries, Confucian rules determined that the outside world, work, politics, and public office, was male territory, while women were left to look after the home, children, and the elderly. For a long time, practices such as foot binding, a cruel and painful custom that forced girls to have tiny feet in order to be considered desirable for marriage, further reinforced the submissive and delicate place reserved for women. This tradition, which was once a symbol of social status for families, left physical and psychological marks on entire generations. Then, with the rise of the Communist Party and the political changes of the mid-20th century, there was a stronger discourse of equality, accompanied by catchphrases like, "Women hold up half the sky." The idea was to remove them from this passive condition and integrate them into factories and outside work. In practice, however, most women continued to earn lower wages, work double shifts, work outside and inside the home, and face pressure to continue caring for their families. It was around this time that the one-child policy emerged, with lasting consequences that impacted on demographics and the collective mentality. In recent years, with the growth of cities and the influence of Western ideas and feminist and human rights movements, a clash has arisen. Maintain family tradition or make room for these women who want to study more, work more, and decide their own paths. It is into this cultural broth that we dive to understand their reality today. Number 2. The one-child policy and the preference for men. It's impossible to talk about the role of women in China without mentioning the one-child policy. Created in 1979 to curb population growth, this measure profoundly changed society and, above all, the lives of women. The logic was simple. If each couple could only have one child, what was the choice? For many families, the answer was obvious: a boy. In traditional Chinese culture, male children are seen as a guarantee of support in old age, while daughters, when they marry, belong to their husband's family. The result was cruel. Selective abortions of girl babies became frequent, and in extreme cases there was even infanticide. This historical preference for male children has generated a huge side effect: gender imbalance. Today, there are millions more men than women in China, creating a scenario known as the army of bachelors. But contrary to what one might imagine, this imbalance has not made life easier for women. On the contrary, those who have decided to focus on their careers or simply postpone marriage have become the target of absurd pressure. The government, now concerned about the falling birth rate, has relaxed its population control policy, first allowing 2 children, then up to 3. But the change didn't have the expected effect. Many women, especially the better educated, have no interest in heeding the government's call to become mothers. And here comes a new problem. Chinese society, which previously encouraged limiting births, now judges women who don't want to have children. They face criticism, are seen as selfish and, in some cases, even suffer public repression. The tables have turned, but for women, the pressure never seems to let up. Number 3. The stigma of sham, leftover women. Can you imagine having an official government label calling you a leftover after the age of 27? That's right. Being single after 27 in China isn't just a personal choice, it's almost a social label. And not just any label, but one of the heaviest a woman can carry. The term sham, which means leftover woman, has become popular to describe those who, in the traditional view, have passed the point of marriage. The concept began to be widely disseminated by Chinese state media in 2007, accompanying the government's efforts to encourage marriages and births. The message was clear. Woman, don't demand too much. Don't delay getting married or you risk ending up alone. Now imagine the psychological impact of this. Young women who have spent their lives studying, getting good jobs and gaining independence are suddenly seen as a social problem. The irony? Most of these women have higher education and good salaries, but instead of being celebrated for their achievements, they are judged for not following the traditional schedule of marriage and motherhood. Does this sound like absurd pressure? It gets worse. Number 4. Fathers who announce their daughters in public squares. In cities like Beijing and Shanghai, the desperation of some parents reaches unbelievable levels. Every weekend, there are so-called marriage markets, where fathers and mothers set up real human classifieds in the open air. With sheets of paper detailing their children's height, age, profession, and salary, they display this information on open umbrellas or makeshift clotheslines. The aim? To arrange a marriage for the stranded, especially for their daughters, who, in their view, need to get married before it's too late. And it doesn't stop there. Many advertisements contain detailed requirements for future sons-in-law and daughters-in-law. Some families only accept suitors with a specific minimum salary, a certain physical type, or even proof of virginity. And this in the 21st century. It sounds surreal, but for many people in China, this almost desperate search for marriage is not seen as an exaggeration, but as a necessity. After all, in the traditional mindset, a woman without a husband doesn't build a family, doesn't give her parents grandchildren, and has therefore failed in life. And anyone who thinks that this idea is disappearing is mistaken. Even with modernization, many young women still have to choose between following their dreams or fitting in with society's expectations. What should be a personal decision becomes a huge weight to carry around every day. Number 5. Happiness licenses and state incentives. To try to reverse the dwindling number of marriages and the real collapse in the birth rate, some Chinese provinces have decided to innovate. They've come up with so-called happiness leave or family leave, supposedly designed to give single women more time to take care of their personal lives. Sounds like a nice idea, right? But in practice, things are quite different. The real message behind these licenses is practically a golden ticket for these women to hurry up and find a husband. A clear example of this happened in Hangzhou, where female teachers were given some extra time off, but with a not-so-subtle subtext. Use this time to get a boyfriend and maybe get pregnant. And it doesn't stop there. In cities like Shanghai, the government itself organizes matchmaking events, trying to bring couples together in an almost official way. If it wasn't enough for the family to meddle in women's love lives, now the government is giving them a helping hand to make sure they don't get left behind. Number 6. Labor market and wage inequality. Many people see China as a land of opportunity and innovation, but gender bias is still present. Numerous reports and surveys show that women face obstacles to career progression, suffer from glaring pay gaps, and often have to choose between dedicating themselves to work or looking after their families. The old double burden dilemma is not exclusive to the West. There are even job advertisements with explicit restrictions, only men or women who have no plans to become pregnant. And as if that weren't enough, the age limit for employment is usually lower for women than for men. In some more traditional areas, such as engineering, women have to prove themselves twice as capable in order to be recognized. When staff are cut, the first to go are usually the women, especially the older ones. Some are pressured to retire early too, no longer competing on an equal footing with men. And most glaringly of all, very few make it to the highest echelons of the Communist Party or national politics. There are billionaire women in China and stories of great executives who have made a name for themselves. But looking at the working masses, the reality is one of pay disparity and a lack of effective protection against discrimination. Sometimes it all gets swept under the carpet because complaining openly against the company or suing the employer can mean being blacklisted and never getting a job again. Number 7. Good wife courses. As if that weren't enough, there are, or at least there were until recently, courses that teach women how to please their husbands. In some cities, these women's morality courses went so far as to say that women shouldn't fight back in the event of aggression or get divorced because the man is the sky and the woman is the ground. The repercussions were so negative that some were closed down by the authorities, claiming that this type of teaching went against social morality. Even so, the mere existence of such courses shows how backward and sexist thinking still finds a place in certain regions or conservative groups. In one of these courses, the students had to get up at 4 in the morning to do the housework, and if their husband wanted something, they had to say yes immediately. Cooking was compulsory because ordering delivery would be dishonorable. It almost sounds like a dystopia, but it was real, and many women ended up in these classes because their families thought they needed to be corrected in order to marry. Although China boasts more female multimillionaires than any other country, a closer look reveals significant disparities between the genders. The average salary of women is notably lower than that of men, with a difference of 35%. In addition, female representation in positions of power is practically non-existent, with no woman ever taking part in the Standing Committee of the Communist Party, the highest body of power in the country. Number 8. Domestic violence and difficulties in reporting it. Unfortunately, the issue of domestic violence in China is another delicate point. For a long time, it was considered an internal family matter, and therefore something that no one should be involved in. As a result, there is a very high rate of underreporting, as many women prefer to keep quiet rather than report their husbands, either out of fear or due to a lack of consistent legal protection. Although China passed a law against domestic violence not so long ago, it is still poorly enforced. In particular, women who are single or in an informal union encounter bureaucratic barriers to filing a complaint. In addition, the #MeToo movement, which has spread around the world, has encountered strong government resistance in China, censorship on social networks, and persecution of activists. As stability is a priority for the Communist Party, any movement that organizes itself too broadly can be seen as a threat. As a result, many women who try to speak out end up being silenced. On the other hand, a new generation of feminists is growing up, willing to fight back. They use devices such as parody, music, and even underground groups to help themselves. Number 9. the weight of appearance and the beauty economy. Another issue that is very prevalent there is the obsession with beauty. Not that this is exclusive to the Chinese, but the exacerbated aesthetic pressure in China today is undeniable. At car shows and technology exhibitions, for example, many promoters are chosen more for their looks than for their ability to talk. Some even refer to the phenomenon as the beauty economy, in which young, beautiful women become marketing strategies. This is reflected in the rapidly growing cosmetics and plastic surgery market. As many young women are under pressure to find a good husband, appearance becomes a bargaining chip. At the same time, women who are older or outside the beauty standard suffer discrimination and are often discarded from selection processes, something that reveals deep-rooted prejudice. Number 10. Cooperative marriages and other strategies. It sounds crazy, but there are even sham marriages to get around social pressure in China. Gay men and lesbian women, for example, often marry each other just to relieve family pressure and avoid society's prying eyes. Here's how it works. On paper, they look like a traditional couple, but in practice, everyone gets on with their lives the way they want. This is because, in many conservative regions, being LGBTQIA+ is still a huge taboo. The family wants a normal wedding with the right to a ceremony, photos, and grandchildren, and the pressure to keep up appearances can be suffocating. So instead of fighting with parents and grandparents or living in fear of reprisals, many people end up entering into this silent agreement. The problem: this kind of solution doesn't change reality, it only hides it. Many end up trapped in relationships of convenience, without being able to live what they really want. To outsiders, it seems that everything is fine, but inside they continue to face an absurd burden. In the end, these cooperative marriages are a reflection of a system that still prioritizes appearances over individual happiness. If so many people feel they have to pretend in order to be accepted, it's because the freedom to simply live their truth is not yet a real option for everyone. Number 11. A perspective for the future. The question remains: will Chinese society adapt to this contingent of women who don't want to or can't follow the traditional script of getting married and having children? On the one hand, the Chinese government desperately needs more babies to avoid a demographic collapse. On the other hand, women themselves are more empowered and less willing to sacrifice their freedom just to comply with a cultural dogma. The tendency, at least in the big cities, is for two factions to form: ultra-traditional families who will continue to value early marriage and early motherhood, and young people who prefer the big city, an international career and a life with fewer strings attached. Perhaps the countryside will retain more conservative practices for a long time to come, while the urban vanguard will open up to new ways of existing. Chinese women, especially in the big cities, are more independent and are no longer getting married before the age of 30. They prioritize professional development, take care of their finances, and postpone the idea of starting a family. Despite this, acceptance of these women's choices by Chinese society remains a challenge. Marriage is still extremely patriarchal, and perhaps this trend of women choosing to be single and independent will grow. But at the moment, this expectation is a mere fantasy. But will Chinese society come to accept these women's choices? Will the government, companies, and society accept this change or continue to push the old script? What do you think? Did you know about this scenario faced by women in China? If you enjoyed learning a little more about this reality, please share, comment, and leave your opinion. Let's keep exchanging ideas and bringing stories from our bello mundo, which sometimes isn't so bello. Thank you very much for following us to the end, and see you next time.